bought my first house at 19 and then my second house at 20, and here's why I'm not gonna buy another one. I wanted to create this video as somewhat of a pushback to all the pressure that we get in our 20s and 30s to buy a house right out the gate. After buying 2 houses, I want to tell you why it's not all that it's chalked up to be, but also what you really need to consider when making this purchase, because it's probably one of the biggest purchases you'll ever make in your life. Big advocate for ownership, having assets, especially if it is your home. But the thing that you don't realize, especially in your early 20s, is that life moves very fast and changes very quickly. So before you buy your first house, I want to share a little bit about my story, and hopefully you can learn from the mistakes that I made so that you don't make them also. So when I was 19, I was getting a house with my then wife, and the idea what we needed to do with our finances and all this stuff, we just found a realtor off of Zillow to help us buy this first house, get the financing and all that stuff. And it was exciting. This dream of living in a house with a big yard and getting all the pets and all that stuff was exciting. But I didn't realize that there was so much more to home buying than just picking out a house. It was a big research project, but also it was a lot more expensive than people make it out to be. Typically, we're comparing rent payment to mortgage payment, but that wasn't actually true because rent is the maximum amount you're paying for the roof over your head. But a mortgage payment is like the bottom because once you're a homeowner, you have to pay for any repairs around the house. You're like responsible for pest control and all this other stuff. Even outside of the financial picture, it was fun to look at these houses, and I had to keep at the top of my mind what was most important: location. And so after looking at what homes were in our budget and the location we wanted to be in, we found our first house, and it wasn't all that great. The home itself was great and whatnot, but after living in it for 2 to 3 months, I realized it wasn't the neighborhood I thought it was. There was no HOA, you would hear gunshots just a couple streets down, and people were racing cars. Although I thought it was a quiet suburb, it ended up not being that. And so, as a result, about a year later, we ended up selling. I understand I got super lucky with when I bought this house and when I sold it. I bought it in January of 2020 and then sold it in December of 2020, coming out positive. And that was only possible because of a fluke in the housing market that increased their housing price so much that we actually came out positive. Most people will not make a positive return on their house unless they've lived in it for 3 to 5 years. The reason why we wanted to move was because it wasn't the environment that we wanted to be in. So after living in my first house for a year, I realized there's a lot of things I didn't think about that were important, like space, the yard work, the neighbors, the neighborhood, school districts, and all this stuff, as well as like the commute to work. So looking at the second house I was going to buy, it was in a much smaller suburb out of town. There's less chaos, and the gunshots that you hear aren't the gunshots you would be concerned about hearing. When we bought this first house, our realtor told us, now you think you're buying your forever home, but you're not. And that was so true, because after a year wanting to move to another one, look for our next forever home, I realized that our needs and our wants and our desires for our life changed so quickly. Because what I wanted at 19 was not the same thing I wanted at 21 or 25, and I know it's not going to be the same as what I want when I'm 30 or 40. So the second house, even though it was like picture perfect, really great neighborhood, all this stuff, having lived in it 3 to 4 years, I didn't realize how much my life was going to change. Now, I don't really talk about this much publicly, but I think it's really important to have the transparency because this is life. And so I didn't expect that I would be divorced in my 20s and then all this stuff's going to change. What I once thought was my forever home, the second home that I bought, it no longer was. And that left me going back to the lifestyle of renting. And I'm actually not that upset about it. It gave me a lot of perspective on the value of flexibility and freedom when it comes to your lifestyle. So what is the takeaway from my story? Homes can be a really great place to build equity, build your net worth if you're making a smart financial decision. And if you want more content on my home buying and home selling mistakes, go ahead and subscribe. I'll create a video on that later. But something people don't consider is the value of being flexible. Who knows if you want to live in the same state for the next 5 to 10 years, or if a job pulls you to a different city even, or if you just start to outgrow the space and grow your family and all that stuff. It's so important to know that having flexibility sometimes is more valuable when you're in your 20s and 30s than building this long-term asset. And here's my suggestion. If you're living in an apartment or you're living at home and you're thinking about buying your first house, I recommend that you actually rent your first house before you make any kind of purchasing decision, because that way you get the experience of home ownership without all the strings that are attached to it. Because buying a house and selling a house, it's a very expensive transaction. And so if you can pay a little bit of a monthly premium to rent and not have any consequence of moving and having those closing costs associated with it, then you really start to learn more about yourself, about what you value in a home, and even just different locations that you could live in. So when you're renting, you don't have to worry about figuring out what plumber you're going to use, electrician, home insurance, all this stuff. All that is just lumped into the rental cost, and it frees up your mind so much to focus on other life goals or planning. Now, whatever you save from being in a rental as opposed to owning your home, you could put that money away in a high yield savings account so that it can grow for whenever you're actually ready to buy a home. Now, something to consider is that when you're buying a home, you really do need a plan to live in it for 5 to 10 years at least, so you can come out positive if you were to sell it. As much as people complain about rent prices going up, home mortgage payments also go up because insurance goes up, local property taxes go up, and you have a lot of the maintenance that you wouldn't have to take care of if you rented, like lawn care, repairs, HOA fees, things like that. Probably will plan to buy a house in the future, but not for myself. I'll do it with a purpose in mind as an investment property where I can either do short-term Airbnb type rentals or long-term rentals, but not one where it ties me down to a specific place. So here are the 3 takeaways I really want you to think about whenever you're considering buying your first house. First, what stage of life are you in? And does it look like you're going to have a lot of changes and growth in the next 2 to 3 years? So if you're getting married, planning to have a kid, or transitioning to a new job, those are things to think about. Second, you need to think about all the costs that it will actually add on to your life when you get a house as opposed to renting an apartment. Sometimes this can be another $500 or $700 a month in things that you don't even know you needed to spend on or save towards in case something does break. The third takeaway really is a question to ask yourself. Are you buying a house because you genuinely see this fits into your financial picture, or do you feel like you're getting pressure from other people, seeing them buy their first house on social media, or friends and family asking, "You're married now, why aren't you buying a house?" So if you're curious about my home buying and home selling mistakes, go ahead and subscribe to the channel as I'm working on those projects. In the meantime, go ahead and check out this video where I cover the 10 money lessons I wish I knew sooner before turning 25.